On page 59 of the Big Book, step 1 reads, "We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable." There's going to be three things we need to accomplish in order to do this. The first is identifying the physical component of the illness. The second is going to be to identify the mental component of the illness. And then the third is going to be to take that information and use it to smash the delusion behind the obsession. And you might learn that that obsession is not what you thought it was or have been taught it was. So stick around for that. The bulk of the information we're going to look at for step 1 comes from the doctor's opinion. That is written in the form of 2 letters, written by William Duncan Silkworth. He's the chief medical director at Towns Hospital, which is the premier hospital for alcoholism treatment in his day. And he worked directly with many alcoholics, including many of the contributors to the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, in his first letter, he talks about one of those contributors. On page XXV, he says, "To whom it may concern, I have specialized in the treatment of alcoholism for many years. In late 1934, I attended a patient who, though he had been a competent businessman of good earning capacity, was an alcoholic of the type I had come to regard as hopeless." Now, of course, we're talking about Bill Wilson, co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he was a competent businessman. He did make millions of dollars on Wall Street in 1920s money, and they still use some of Bill's ideas on Wall Street today. And the doctor is saying that despite this worldly success, and despite the fact that Bill's not homeless and drinking out of a brown paper bag, he is still the type of alcoholic Silkworth cannot help. Now, in Silkworth's day, he didn't differentiate between the hard drinker and the alcoholic drinker like we do. Anybody who drank and had problems as a result of it, or drank too much, was labeled alcoholic, and Silkworth could identify alcoholics that he could help, and then this class of hopeless alcoholic that he puts Bill in. We're going to learn more about that in the next letter. But in the next paragraph, he says, "In the course of his third treatment, he acquired certain ideas concerning a possible means of recovery. As part of his rehabilitation, he commenced to present his conceptions to other alcoholics, impressing upon them that they must do likewise with still others. This has become the basis of a rapidly growing fellowship of these men and their families. This man and over 100 others appear to have recovered." And so if we've ever had issue with an alcoholic or a person in recovery using this word recovered, we can lay that issue to rest here because we have the doctor's prognosis that we have recovered. So identifying the physical component, we're going to be in the next letter the doctor writes on page XXVIII. He says at the first paragraph, "We believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all." So let's break down this paragraph and see what we're talking about. We know that he takes this physical compulsion and refers to it as an allergy. Now, medically, technically speaking, allergy isn't quite the right term, because we know that an allergy is something for which we can test and the body produces histamines, but in layman's terms, allergy is quite appropriate because it illustrates nicely that there is an effect being triggered, which, by the way, is the only appropriate use of that word, by alcohol in the system once it's put in the system of an alcoholic. And that effect that's triggered is this X yields Y equation. What that means is X is a small number of drinks, like 2, and an alcoholic desires or wants or promises to just have 2 drinks for the evening, and then those 2 drinks lead him to have 4, 5, 6, 7, some larger amount, which is Y. This means that an alcoholic has no consistent control over the amount they consume in any given night. Now, how do we know if an alcoholic has the phenomenon of craving? How do we help a person identify this? Well, there's 3 questions we can ask. The first is, can you determine exactly how much you're going to drink? And if you're applying this to a different sort of addiction, you could put use in the case of drugs, or eat in the case of overeating, or act out in the case of gambling or sex. Can you determine exactly how much you're going to do before you start and stick to it every time? Have you ever experienced wanting to limit your drinking and found that you couldn't? And have you ever failed the test for controlled drinking? Now, many of us in our drinking histories have experiences where we failed the test for controlled drinking without even realizing it. So a lot of us don't even need to attempt this, but let's talk about what it is. We're going to find it on page 31. It says, "We do not like to pronounce any individual as alcoholic, but you can quickly diagnose yourself. Step into the nearest bar room and try some controlled drinking. Try to drink and stop abruptly. Try it more than once. It will not take long for you to decide if you're honest with yourself about it. It may be worth a bad case of jitters if you get a full knowledge of your condition." So let's break down what this paragraph is saying. The first thing we notice is that we're going to drink with a purpose. We're going to try some what he calls controlled drinking. And so I'm going to call this 3 drinks. Whatever your favorite drink is, you pour 3 shots of that, and you take it just like this. 1, maybe you wait a minute, take a sip of a chaser. 2, maybe you wait another minute, take another sip of a chaser. And 3, and then we are done for the night. This whole process should take no more than 10 minutes tops. And I believe by anybody's definition, this would be an example of drinking and stopping abruptly. And if we're successful, and by successful I mean we go the entire night, and by the entire night I don't mean we were waiting till midnight or we're waiting till we wake up the next morning. I mean a full 24-hour period without taking a drop more than the 3rd drink, we're going to go ahead and try it the next night. And if we take those 3 in that 10 minutes time the next night without taking a drop more, we're going to try it the next night and the next night. How many nights are we going to try this? Well, the book says it will not take long, and I think anyone would agree that 7 nights in a row is not a long time at all. It's certainly long enough to provide enough data for us to know whether or not this phenomenon of craving develops. And in fact, I've never met a real alcoholic that can try this experiment 7 nights in a row without taking a drop more than the 3rd drink. So anyone that can do that, I'm likely to get on board that they're not alcoholic. Now the book tells us that whatever it takes, bad case of jitters, little shakes, that'll be worth it to finally lay this issue to rest and get a full knowledge of your condition, because that is actually more important to actually know for good and for all, yes, I have this condition of body. So if we cannot pass the test for controlled drinking, we know that 1 drink for us is going to yield a consequence. And the consequence of a drink is this phenomenon of craving. 1 drink always carries with it the risk of triggering the phenomenon of craving. Now, if this is our only problem, if this condition of body is all we have going on, then we know we cannot drink successfully. And if that's it, if that's the issue, that we cannot drink successfully, then our solution is going to be as simple as don't take a drink. And you might hear this from people all over the place, but if that were true, then our prognosis would be manageable. If all we had was this condition of body and the solution was as simple as don't take a drink, then the condition we're suffering from is as manageable as any other allergy. We simply don't put the stuff in our substance. But most real alcoholics can attest that there's more to the story, and that more is identifying the mental component as well. And so on the same page in the doctor's opinion that we were on, XXVIII, at the bottom of the page, the doctor continues, "Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot after a time differentiate true from false." Now I'm going to offer you that this is true insanity, this mental blank spot, this not being able to differentiate true from false. It is not making the same mistake over and over again and expecting different results. I hear that all the time. It's falsely attributed to Einstein. He actually never said that. And it's one of the things that I address in the new ebook that I'm putting together. So you can get a copy of that, and I'll address it there. So what I will say is how insanity does manifest itself. And now I'm going to go back to what the doctor said in an earlier paragraph, that men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. And I'm going to say that this effect is the sense of ease and comfort that comes at once by taking a few drinks. Now the cost of that 5 minutes of ease and comfort, let's say, is your money, possibly your job, the respect and admiration of your loved ones, your legal standing, possibly your freedom, your health, possibly your life, everything you care about. And now when we have soundness of mind, when we are sane, the true response to this proposition is, I'm sorry, that's not worth the cost. I'll have to go find another way to get 5 minutes of the sense of ease and comfort. But when we are struggling with the insanity, when the insanity of the first drink is upon us, this mental blank spot is upon us, this same proposition yields this response. Wow, this is totally worth the cost. In fact, it seems like a bargain. It's only going to cost me everything I care about. I'll gladly pay that cost. And it's the inability to differentiate these two statements from one another that truly, truly constitutes the insanity of the first drink. So if we have this mental blank spot, we know that there's also an X yields Y equation, but this time we're talking about time. An alcoholic swears off alcohol for X amount of time, like a week, a month, a year, maybe the rest of their life, and they find themselves drinking after Y amount of time, which is less. So I'm not going to drink for a week, but I'm drinking tonight. I make a decision not to drink for a month, but I'm drinking tomorrow. I make a decision not to drink for the rest of the year, but I'm drinking next weekend. I make a decision not to drink for the rest of my life, and I'm drinking within a week or two. And so if that's how things are playing out, we know that the alcoholic has no consistent defense against the first drink. They cannot predict every single time that they are not going to take a drink. Now, some questions to help an individual identify whether or not they have the mental blank spot. Can you determine exactly when you're going to start drinking and stick to it every time? Have you ever experienced wanting to wait to start drinking and found that you could not? And have you ever failed the test for controlled abstinence? Now this one maybe we haven't tried before, or we haven't given it a serious effort. So let's talk about what that is. We're going to find that on page 34. It says, if anyone questions whether he's entered this dangerous area, and I've bracketed for emphasis the area that we're talking about. This is where we can't quit through the use of willpower. So if you're questioning whether or not you still have any willpower left, let him try leaving liquor alone for 1 year. If he is a real alcoholic and very far advanced, there is scant chance of success. Now I want to put this test in context because the people Bill was writing this test to did not have any of the recovery resources that we had today. Today we can go to 5 meetings a day, call a sponsor every day, go see a therapist, go to inpatient counseling for 90 days, do an intensive outpatient counseling for another 90 days, hire a sober coach, all of that stuff. They didn't have any of this. So to put this test in context, in today's terms, this would be the equivalent of take all your recovery literature, pack it up in a box and hide it in the corner, and move forward with the rest of your life as if this drinking thing were a speed bump, ignore all things recovery related, and simply try not to drink for the next year. Under those conditions, the book tells us we think few to whom this book will appeal, meaning real alcoholics, can stay dry anything like a year. Some will be drunk the day after making their resolutions, most of them within a few weeks. I'm going to go ahead and take the liberty of defining a few weeks as 3 weeks, and if that's the case, then we see the timeline for relapse for an alcoholic swearing off alcohol for just a year is going to be 1 to 21 days later taking a drink. So if we've determined that we fail the test for controlled abstinence, the doctor goes on to tell us their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience a sense of ease and comfort, which comes at once by taking a few drinks. So here we see that 0 drinks for an alcoholic yields a consequence. 0 drinks for an alcoholic causes an alcoholic to feel restless, irritable, and discontent. That's the side effect of not taking a drink. And if this is the case, we know that a real alcoholic cannot abstain successfully, whether it's because they're going to drink again or because they're going to be miserable not drinking. Either way, an alcoholic cannot abstain from drinking successfully. Now, if that's the only problem an alcoholic is suffering from, if we didn't have this condition of body and we simply had this condition of mind, then our solution would be take a drink. Just like the solution for a diabetic is take a shot of insulin every day, we could theoretically buy a 30 case of beer, leave it in the garage, and drink 1 can a day as medication. maybe two, one in the morning and one in the evening, and we could just stay medicated that way. It wouldn't trigger anything inside of us. It wouldn't trigger an allergy or a phenomenon of craving. It would simply keep the restless, irritable discontent at bay, which would make this problem by itself manageable as diabetes or something similar to that. So when we put this condition of body and mind next to one another, we can see why Silkworth refers to it as hopeless, because we cannot drink successfully and we cannot not drink successfully. We have a problem that says the solution is take a drink. We have another problem that says the solution is don't take a drink. We have two conditions in and of themselves that are manageable that combine in an unmanageable way. And this is why Silkworth uses the word hopeless. This is why the big book uses the word powerless. It's not poetic to describe something that's tough or difficult. It's a term we're using to describe something that is impossible. It is physically impossible for any of us to simultaneously take a drink and not take a drink at the same time. But this isn't all to the story. Just admitting that we have this condition of body and mind and that they combine in a hopeless way isn't all there is to it. We then have to go a step further and take this information and use it to smash the delusion behind the obsession. So we're going to find what we're talking about on page 30. At the top of the page, it says, most of us have been unwilling to admit we were real alcoholics. And I can tell you, in my 16 plus years of working with other alcoholics and having conversations, many are open and ready to admit to some heinous, regrettable behavior. Driving drunk with children in the car, dealing drugs out of their mother's house, stealing medication from their dying relatives, all sorts of things, but then show them this condition of body and mind, this lack of control, this lack of defense, and suddenly that's offensive. And they're unwilling to admit that. I don't want it to be about the fact that I'm not making choices, right? And the reason for that is the next sentence. It says, no person likes to think he is bodily and mentally different from his fellows, which is what admitting to alcoholism is. I'm physically deformed, I'm mentally deformed. Therefore, it is not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove we can drink like other people. That's the test on 31. The idea that somehow, someday he will control and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. And I'm going to circle that for you so you can see that this is really what alcoholics obsess about. We don't obsess about alcohol, we don't obsess about drinking, we obsess about drinking successfully, because for most alcoholics, however short and fleeting it may have been, there was a time where we could both control and enjoy our drinking. We could control the amount we took. We could take exactly the amount we wanted to take every single time, and it would have exactly the effect we wanted it to have every single time. The persistence of this illusion, now the illusion is that those days are ahead of us still and not completely behind us. The persistence of this illusion is astonishing. Many pursue it into the gates of insanity or death, and I've watched many an alcoholic run off the edge of a cliff chasing the dangling carrot of this delusion of control and enjoy. So the next paragraph tells us what the first step truly is. It says, we learned we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. And now I want to point out that the word concede isn't just to admit something. It's to admit something after first resisting or denying it. So if you were to concede to your innermost self, you would have had to have been having an argument with your innermost self. Now, I'm going to ask you to think about this. I'm not going to ask you to admit you're a real alcoholic right now. I'm not going to ask you to do that. But if you were to admit you're a real alcoholic right now, would it be fair to call that admission a concession? Would that be something you'd be giving into after a prolonged argument with yourself? Then it goes on to say the delusion that we're like other people, or presently may be, has to be smashed. And so I'll often ask an alcoholic, can you smash the delusion? And they'll say no. And I'll say, what do you mean? And they'll say, I cannot promise you that I'll never drink again. And I'll say, great. And they'll say, what do you mean, great? And I'll say, if you can't promise me that you'll never drink again, then you have smashed the delusion. You are absolutely clear about what you're struggling with. And it's my humble prayer that if you're watching this video, you will have an opportunity to smash the delusion before it's too late. And if you can do that, then you're ready for the next video. I thank you for watching.